had to find it on the website.
Maybe it's on the website.
I don't know.
generators and all that. But they are the minority of the companies that are there. So I think that what we have, it's part of the solution, but not the whole solution. And it's already not a third part. But to your point of this social continuum of support is being very clear about what type of companies are we speaking about. Like, it would be beautiful actually, here I am with my next product. To look at segmenting basically the type of companies you have in the blue economy, because some of them are a lot more, I guess, technology driven, some are more like on hardware and all that. So they will have different needs, they will have different types of financials to come here. And the reality is that in a lot of countries, the financial ecosystems are not diverse. Like in some of the countries where we work, our choice is a microfinance institution or a bank, which is absolutely not what you need when you're a niche enterprise, at the early stages. So it's, so it has to go basically both ways. Like we need to really understand what type of companies we are speaking about so that we can develop the financial and non-financial solutions that are really suited for them. But yeah, we need diversity. And my last point would be, what I found also really interesting this morning in hearing about the pitch of the companies is, in this sector, it might make sense like commercially from a business perspective, but it might not make sense from a more like climate thing. Like one of the gentlemen gave the feedback, yeah, but you're speaking about like fishing tuna. That's not good at all from the biodiversity thing. But I'm an investor, and first of all, I invest into intermediaries, but then I don't know everything about the tuna. So I think it's also really hard because you need, we're talking a solution, sorry, but because you need all of these different perspectives around the table so that the solutions we develop really make sense, are adapted. Because the problem of now for startups to grow is that it always it's like, yeah, it's good until that point, and that's why you don't get the exposure to support them. It's very complex.
And I think that embodies one of the bigger challenges. Just by the language that is being used, whether it's in the application process, whether it's in the selection process, or whether you're going to a bank, with the language that is being used, you're excluding certain kind of people and you're favoring another kind of person. And whether you're the first to go through this whole innovation journey in your country, you keep on encountering these different situations, which to get over these barriers requires a certain language or understanding of that discourse. And I think that's a huge challenge, because from the get-go, you can't know this totality of the language. You can't, in your application process, how is it going to package so that you can get someone who has that IT, who has that business background, who has everything you're looking for. So I think it's that focus of that understanding of the power of the language that is needed or used to include or exclude that different processes.
I really like that you bring that up. So, coming from kind of a very classic corporate investor, like, I hate to say it, but stereotypical kind of Silicon Valley like form of funding, that language part is really important, because the frustrations you shared around, needing to have like a solid data room and all these references and an ecosystem to lean on and the infrastructure around it, what are the policies, like, all of those things, it's a lot to put on a founder, and, especially if they don't have the people directly around them to be able to back them up and fill in the roles and provide the information that's necessary. Because what's difficult from our point of view is that, unfortunately, that's the kind of language that we speak. We're screening 60 companies a week that are able to provide that data room to that level of detail that we naively think like, oh, a company is only able to create half a data room, then does that speak to the quality of the company? And it sucks that that is the case. And another thing I want to bring up is that, I really appreciate the frustrations that are getting shared around just the fact that there's like, a lack of funding, there, all the barriers that are in the way of getting investors to really be on board, because you feel that there's like this extra pressure to step up to a level of quality that quite frankly seems unreachable, and for many, is for that stage of that company. And what's tough is that, when I look at the kinds of companies that are getting funded back home in California, people are willing to throw millions of dollars at just an idea. But the reason they're willing to take on that risk is because they have conviction. And they have enough conviction that, even if this person, doesn't fit with this CTO, they're just going to go to Stanford University down the block and find another CTO. Like there's so much that can just lean on the fact that everyone's 1 or 2 degrees separated from each other in Silicon Valley, that you can assume a lot of that risk and have a lot of conviction early on. And then what struggles is that, for someone like me who's trying to actively source our first investment in the African continent that we have not yet been able to reach, what's tough is that there's the pressure on the startups to reach this level of quality, because for someone like me, I don't have enough of that conviction. I don't have enough people to lean on. I don't have a network of all of you folks at the table. I just arrived to Cape Town 2 weeks ago. This is my first time on the continent. And I'm 2 months down the line, we have a follow-up conversation. You go, I know 2 people who would fit your mandate. And then that already clears and takes a bit of pressure off of you having to create that level of quality that you would have to create if we didn't have that degree of connection. So which is unfortunate, but I do bring that up, and I think, keep flaming the investors here, because there's a lot that, we can't keep rolling on the assumption that the quality of companies, in Africa are less than any other because of to your fault or to your fault. But it could just be down to we're not speaking the same language, and we don't have enough people to lean on to even trust each other going both ways, right? So I think we should definitely keep talking about some of those frustrations.
So please go ahead. Okay, so I wanted to add something to what you said about being in a networks to get to the right talent. So that's one of the things, I guess, as VFA Global, we have the companies fund as well. And that's one of the things that we used to rely on, getting an investment committee to propose companies into the companies fund. But I just wanted to say, one of the issues with such a model that also doesn't allow open screening is biases. You'll still get the people who speak the same language being funded by the same founders. So I think it's still important to still have an open way of recruiting, and it can be very expensive, I think, because you have to put a lot of hours to go through a deck that's probably not quality, but speak to the founder, find out what the intentions are or what they're trying to achieve. But I just wanted to flag that in terms of still being very open to go beyond your talks.
So we're coming to time on this segment, but I think there's a few other areas I wanted to look into in maybe 5 additional minutes, and then also ask the audience if they have any frustrations they'd like to air with us to include on the board. So perhaps maybe from Mercator's perspective around the data, or around the scientific capacity, and a lot of as we have here, we need the sort of initial ideas for innovation generation. You've been running hackathons and these sort of activities. Do we think that the actual idea generation is a challenge? We've talked a little bit, or quite a bit, on the pipeline, so this is a kind of assuming the idea is there and the company is near formation or onward, but what about before this? So Sarah, from your perspective, being at universities, is it a challenge to tech transfer, or to transition from lab to, for example, in the US we have tons of programs from lab to company. Is that a gap? So maybe some other issues we want to raise, if they're there or not, I don't know.
Oh yes, I must say, I'm from Stellenbosch University, and they've been trying, they put a lot of effort within Novus to have a branch of the university that assists commercializing ideas. So they have they outsource resources such as lawyer for the IP and engineers if they're needed. so they de-risk the idea to start building a company. But there is still, again, a big language gap. When I started, my understanding was that this branch would just take the idea and run with it, and then I sit back and get the royalties. And it took a year and a half to realize that's not the case. You actually have to learn how to build the business yourself, and they just assist. But it's, the language barrier is a big thing, and also the goal are different from academics compared to an entrepreneur. And I don't think all academics can be entrepreneur actually, because you need to learn skills in marketing and communicating with people that you don't build in the academic environment. So you must be prepared to dive into it. And I think to get a stronger branch at the university level to just explain this and don't give that for granted would be a great start.
I think hackathons were a nice opportunity for both the science world and the business world to merge. But for most people, it's just one weekend of fun time when I'm a student. So and then you go back to academia because you're going to be a researcher. So the goal is for them to, in a hackathon, to see a perspective there. Like I can be an entrepreneur and I can join this network. Or reversely, it's about business or data scientists to learn more about the science part. So when they build a solution, it's more based on the needs on the field. So in that way, this is a bit more into solution, but doing more cross trainings and stuff like that. And we talked about the issue of data accessibility. This is maybe one challenge that we have on our hand is trying to reach the good person, the person who actually needs the data and is asking for it. And for us, it's also hard because we can wave around and say like, we have this data, it's free and it's open access and just please use it. We can offer mentoring, but it's hard to reach the person that will be in need. So it's, for me, today it's a really nice opportunity to note down all the needs because it's mostly here we are providing services more than we can offer some, like we are not building our program, we are mostly listening to bring some science to it and to support also. You talked about funding and credibility of the solution. We can also, with science, kind of find proof of solution, saying, okay, this is from science part something that is needed on the field, and the answer is valid. And you talked about the tuna things. So this is something science can have a look at it, and so to prove a solution on that matter.
And then thank you. And then the last one that I would like to discuss is around government. We were supposed to have a representative from the African Union who wasn't able to make it, but who could offer some of that perspective. So perhaps a bit unfairly to the government folks, because we don't have any reps here. But have we experienced challenges that are in the governance area? So feel free. I know you have, so come on. Prices.
Yeah, of course, government doesn't exist if you are not there. So I would just say, basically, culturally, Africans, and allow me to put that context, is that Africans, we are, ocean and blue economy has not been our thing, for the longest time. So there is a lot of cultural barriers that we are breaking. Like I said before, there's a lot of fuss that are happening when it comes to this subsector. And probably that's why it's the fastest growing subsector in Africa. The potential of it is $300 billion. Africa external debt is about $630 billion, so you can imagine. And it's nowhere near 10% of that. So, well, it's quite an area that requires a lot of investment. But we have a lot of challenges when it comes to people understanding aquaculture, mariculture, and its potential compared to, let's say, agriculture and other subsistence sort of farming, etc. And that's just at the macro level. At the micro level, I can bet here that not 50% of Africans in this room cannot swim. So how do we explore the oceans? How do we explore these sort of opportunities if generally we are not interested in exploring, in learning how to explore them? maybe I have that privilege to say that because I'm African, but that's the truth. Our culture has been more lenient towards land economic activities compared to more ocean economic activities, and it's changing. And when you look at also at the consumerism patterns, the global average consumerism of fish, in Kenya we are at around 4 kgs per capita per year. The global average is about 20 kgs per capita per year. So again, even we don't like fish, we don't like eating fish. We still like our red meat, our dry, for South Africans, and etc. So it's everything is demand driven at the end of the day. So it's the work of the government to some extent support this culture. For example, in East Africa, white meat demand is growing quite fast. I don't know about other parts of the world, but it's still not yet at the point of overtaking the demand for red meat. But it's something that as governments they need to continue putting in policies that will support the growth of the sector, because without demand or with counterproductive policies that limit investment in this blue economy, the sector will not go. I wouldn't want it to be liberalized fully, private on, but there are some things that when you say you're going as an external person, fishing is quite political at the end of the day. You have heard that with the Brexit, the main issue was actually fishing. The same thing happens all over the world. So at the end of the day, fishing is quite political, and waters are quite political. It's like mining rights, etc. So government has a central role to play in making streamlining everything around blue economy. And at the end of the day, it's the work of the government either to stimulate demand and also stimulate productivity via policy, or creating an enabling environment for startups and businesses to thrive.
Governance comments? Thank you, Francis.
I often feel that certain people in governmental positions don't fully grasp the problem. So again, there is some language barrier happening. And I experienced it in South Africa, where I had to explain to government officials that ecotourism can bring wealth to local economy more than consumptive use of fish. So we have data, we have papers about it, and the people are in the position to make decision around this matter didn't know.
Political appointees.
Yes, probably. So how do we put more people put up?
Really the people behind the scenes, not the political figure that you probably interacted with, would be the best people to approach.
Yes, there is committees and then there is advisory board, but it puzzles me that the people at the end don't get this information already.
So, I'm just going to connect the issue of policy and maybe something that was said on that end. This is issue of ideas. I remember when we were recruiting for TechUp, there was this notion that I don't want to share my idea because somebody is going to steal it. And I think, and you talked about also scientists sort of sitting in the desk, they know the ideas that need to solve different issues, but because they're not going to run after those ideas, they still don't necessarily share them with others that can run the ideas. And it could be also a matter of patterns and policies around patterns. So it could be creating a pattern, but then letting others run it and you still benefit from your innovation. So I see a connection there between policy and sparking innovation. When such structures are clear, then there could be more collaboration in terms of idea and moving those ideas forward. There's also defining policies early enough. So it's something you see in the financial sector. regulators are always running up after innovation, so things happen, but also having a test and learn approach, allowing different innovations to go as we develop them. And I'm sorry I'm getting into solutions, but like when I think about the blue economy space, I think about aquaculture, say in Kenya. It has a lot to do with open waters, and there's a lot of policy around that. And if it's not defined, then who's going to innovate around it? We were a bit disappointed when we took our fellows to the coast, and you could see that there's potential for aquaculture. But who's running the aquaculture? They're like 2 cages, and they both belong to Kempri, but no other innovator has moved that beyond that. They've been testing them, but it has not attracted private investment to move the needle. If you look at Tanzania, well, innovation around aquaculture has been more aggressive there, and you'll see that innovators have moved in from different countries to set up ponds. But I guess there's also a point where policymakers can go beyond their mandate, in the sense that you introduce something and you have the right structures, but you also want to be involved in the delivery of those solutions. So what farmers there are doing is they're sitting and they're waiting for the policymaker to now bring the cages, and they start working, whereas innovators could have gone ahead and used that platform. So there's a question of, if I move in and then the government still moves in, will I be able to sort of make headway and compete with the government? So yeah, again, I'm saying a lot, and I'm hoping that you can make it more concise, but that's why I see policy coming into this innovation space.
Last thoughts from the table? Yes.
So just building on your point with the case study of the Kenyan coast, the potential for mariculture, agriculture, it's huge. But then again, the policy within that space poses a lot of risk for the small scale fishing, especially along the coast, because that security, or the security of tenure, is almost zero. And the processes to get that there's so many bureaucracies to get that security of tenure for the small scale fisher at the coast. And that once again comes down to the decision maker. Governance is about decision making, and when you've got the people who are making decisions which affect the whole country, the government, we have to ask ourselves, how are these decision makers being informed? Where are they getting their information from? How are the people who are living their livelihoods from the ground, from that resource, how are their contexts being sent and delivered to the decision makers at the top, so that it can be considered in the policy, and it can be considered in a way which ends up, influencing things which are conducive for everyone all the way down. And we do not see that, because I think there's just a lot of barriers and bureaucracies of this information transfer to the decision makers. And I personally, I do not know, which is why it's good to have a forum like this to open it up. But I think that's a huge challenge. That exchange of information from ground realities to decision makers, and that influencing policy which affects people's ground realities.
Yeah. Annalisa? Yes, please.
Just to add on to that, I work on the ground as well with small-scale fisheries, and one of the issues that frequently come up is the issue of inclusivity when it comes to governance. They always tell me that the government came to do this and this and this, but we were not informed before that. So I think it's one of those issues that need to be addressed. As much as the government will say, okay, they went through the whole process of informing us with affected stakeholders, but they got on the ground and had conversations with the actual fishers, the people who are actually impacted the most. And I think it goes back to communication. I think you've raised that issue as well. I feel like maybe there might be communication barriers, and we need to look into how to bring in technology to kind of fill in that gap.
Is it also the issue of equity in the fact that it's not just about communication, but it's about Because I was thinking when you were talking earlier about, we're talking about investors, we're talking about startups, but then we're also talking about communities, aren't we? Because ultimately, I can't remember who it was that mentioned this morning that if you haven't got the benefit structure right for the community, then it's just not going to work, whatever it is. And I just wonder whether there's a better way that we could get the community. Obviously, the community talks through the startup talks to the community, but is that enough? And do we need to have better mechanisms to have communities not only being aware of what's going on, but actively participating and having equitable rights and ownership and say in whatever it is that the solution. I know we're talking about profitable solutions, but within commercial solutions. It just feels like they're sort of not at the table enough in drawing up whatever the incentive structure is that the proposition is coming up with.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you talk about community, we have a representative of the community at the table. And it just starts there. We co-creating on finding problems to solutions to people that are not at the table. And yet, for me, that's a problem in itself. Because I think all of us are stakeholders, but the main stakeholder that we're trying to solve problems for is not at the table.
So I just wanted to add an example from the Blue Study tour that we undertook yesterday, and we were hosted by Avalodi. But one of the officials came on board and he was sharing his story, and he was talking about how policies were implemented in Cape Town around quotas and how you have to register to be a fisher, and they were not consulted. And then he's like a traditional fisher, 4 generations down of fishers, and one day he became a poacher because he's termed a poacher because he doesn't have the right licenses. He does not know how to engage with policymakers. So I just wanted to reinforce, I guess, the message that was put on the table, that aspect of including, but also enabling them to have their voices on the table.
I just wanted to add to your comment in the conversation we were having right before we came down here was the idea that we want to invest or grant into solutions that are based out of the community or that have been developed in conjunction with the community, because they will not be financially viable. Because if the tech is built in a vacuum away from that community, because the tech seems neat or seems like a good idea, but functionally it doesn't work because the way I hold this in my hand while I'm also out on a boat fishing doesn't work or something, they're never going to use it. So the finance and that constructive development of the technologies, and so that's something we're always asking ourselves too, is like how much should you talk to the groups that it's going to be used in, because that's really important to see success.
I think we've noted all of that. Audience, any challenges that you think we have missed here that you'd like? All right.
Yeah, shall I go? Okay.
Yes.
I'm Josh from the World Bank Group. I lead the ProGlue program here in South Africa and also do BC between Cape Town and Dar es Salaam. I have a laundry list and then I have a short list of 4, if that's okay. I'll be really quick. So I work in the ocean plastics and solid waste management space. Often the applications and the innovations that we're getting are actually not expensive enough, so the due diligence is too tedious for the funding required. Our earmarks for biomedical or some IT app are always easy to fund, but even if you want the Rolls Royce of the plastic recycling operation, it's rarely going to cost more than $500,000, so why bother? The small to medium enterprise models that we look at are often too cottage or they're pet projects. They're saying, we'll do an Uber for trash. We hear this all of the time, or we're doing like a waste arts and crafts program or valorization. It's not very convincing. And then those that actually do present an innovation in the plastics recycling space are not found in the yellow pages under waste recycling businesses. They're actually backroom operations in fast-moving consumer good manufacturing industries like paper pulpers and petrochemical industries that are doing something interesting with an rPET resin, for example. Now you're not a small to medium enterprise. Now you're a $1 billion company. I'm not allowed to give you money anymore. Other than occasional concessional finance and grants, the entrepreneurs have no access to margin or credit or cash loan facilities available, which would be very ripe. You know, in California or in Greater London, you can borrow at such easy rates. These people are, you know, very proudly investing their own personal kind of piggy bank into the businesses. I think there's a real opportunity in carbon and plastic credits, but they're extremely tedious to access. And if they're not above $30 per metric ton, then they're pretty meaningless, because that's where I would par the cost of waste collection and safe disposal in sub-Saharan Africa. And then from policy, why would I invest in effectively providing a public utility service in solid waste if in South Africa, for example, you're barred at a 3-year term? In Dar es Salaam, you're barred at 1 year, and I now have to go and shop for compaction vehicles and very expensive plastic recycling machinery. How on earth am I going to justify the capex for the provision of a basic utility service with just a 1 to a 3-year contract? So some of the policy constraints I saw. I also wanted to just put like a question to the audience. It seems like there's, you know, you're churning through dozens of models a week in kind of Southern California and Greater London with a really well-validated and profitable business model, but you're spending weeks out here in Africa and not really even able to find one bankable project in this kind of space. So how do you, I'm just curious, how do you justify that opportunity cost? Is it a nice to have kind of pet project of the corporation? Or do you see this as kind of getting in early, getting your foot in the door, because in 20 or 30 years this will be extraordinarily profitable just from a purely capitalist, money-making venture? So I'll stop there.
We'll get those on the board during the break. Others who are equally organized. In the back, yes, go ahead.
Actually, congratulations to the exchange. It was very professional and very insightful. I have one thing which is mentioned every time. It's about intelligence of blue economy, where they mentioned that the scientists doing some research, but the information is too scientific for entrepreneurs to take it, to use it. It's something I think someone from Kenya just mentioned it. So can we have a project where you can have open source intelligence for blue economy for entrepreneurs to use? Because even the person from which mentioned about the hackathon is when the students at university, they has an energy to innovate, but unfortunately it's only for 1 week or 1 month where they do together. So my question is about, is there a possibility to have digested scientific information for blue economy to connect the entrepreneur, the academic, and also the people which are experienced in the sector, as the lady just mentioned. So we can do a project in blue economy, not stay in a room, let's go underground to see the reality of the project. And concerning this intelligence, the issue that most research is in English. So if you have some French-speaking entrepreneur who want to do a project in blue economy, so when he goes to seek the intelligence on the internet, he has only report in English. So it's not only French, it can be Portuguese or Spanish. So this is my questions are around how to digest the research in blue economy and make it accessible and in a community language where everyone can listen. So this is thank you for your intervention. It was very nice.
Okay, we have to move on. Go ahead.
So we're going to take a very short break. So
Yeah.
just before we take a break, we don't want to lose anybody's ideas. We want to make sure we've got all the voices. So you've got post-its. This is the working piece. Just on with your pen, just on one post-it, write the biggest challenge from your perspective, and on the second post-it, the second biggest challenge. And then just as you go out for your break, I'll put a little place on the board here on the top left where you put your first post-it and second post-it, just so we can capture the whole brainstorming session. And not more than sort of 4 to 5 words on the post-it, so that it's nice and concise. So just 2 challenges, your biggest challenge, your second biggest challenge. Put it on the board and then we can take a break. When do you want to run to?
10 minutes after, so it's exactly 3 o'clock. So we've been at this for an hour and 15 minutes. So yeah, exactly 10 after, and then we will move on to the next 3 stages. I mean, the second stage and third stage are maybe quicker, much quicker, and then we'll hopefully get to spend some time So what we're going to do is we're going to take all these challenges when we come back, so please keep writing while I talk. We're then going to theme them and see if there's any bigger thematics that are coming out. And then we're going to vote on which themes we're going to spend probably close to an hour actually looking at some solutions. We won't lose any of the themes and any of the challenges that we don't discuss, but we will keep them for another time to look at for someone else to look into for us later. Okay, so please get up, and when you have your decision, please write neatly. So
Just
we can
your
read them.
biggest challenges, yeah.
Right,
Challenge
so-
one,
My
challenge
second
two.
challenge is the biggest challenge.
And we can pass some around to the audience as well, in case you would like to put one or two.
Nice and concise.
So, anyone wants to write some challenges?
Maybe, Ron,
Like to share?
maybe 4:15.
Pass around.
4:15. Hope you can read my writing.
I don't know, mine's way worse. That's why I have computers.
Your biggest challenge is second challenge.
And second.
I'm only allowed two. Your two biggest challenges. Keep the other ones down here. Put your other ones down here in the parking lot. Yeah. So we don't use them. No, but I'm sure other people will see it. Normally when you theme them, it lands up
Yes, I just don't know how to label these two yet. This is also governance. Science-based ideas to execute. So. Can you unpack that a little bit?
So at least in our experience, as on the one hand, we've received a lot of encouragement around how holistic solutions to solving small-scale fisheries problems. On the other hand, one puts oneself in the position of then having to do a hell of a lot with the challenges of getting that right.
Okay.
Especially in the early phases where
you want to focus in, but actually you need all of these other. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Financial institutions.
Yes, and this one is very clearly here. So yeah,
just got to label.
I know. Folks, can we get back to the table, please?
We're also opening a line for the financial parts of things. So do they have to integrate that into this?
Can we all go back?
It's really new.
Yeah. What they can use is they can come with each dot that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to kick off, everyone.
Are we all back? More or less.
Pretty much.
Yeah, great. So from the sticky notes, I've made some broad categories. If you think that a category is too big or too small or flat out wrong, just access to ocean knowledge. So we have, for example, connecting science to entrepreneurs who may want to execute that or who are looking for an entrepreneurial idea. We have kind of an understanding of the blue economy and blue technology and that kind of capacity. We have the open source blue economy to scientific knowledge. So that's one category that we have here. Does that seem cohesive from those ideas? I know you're not going to be able to see, so I'll try to go slowly. The second one I've named is sourcing and capacity. This one I have a sense it might be a bit big. But for example, pipeline, skills, ideas, talent, pipeline of solutions again. So what I'm hearing from or seeing from these is really sourcing and capacity. Does that feel okay? And then the next one, from fragmentation to continuity. So I spent like 5 minutes staring at these to try to figure out what to call it other than funding.
Finance.
Because that's
Yeah.
obvious, as I said in the briefing. But what I'm understanding from these cards, for example, we have no continuous financial support, differentiated funding, innovative finance, de-risking. Oh, that's new. Okay, yeah, like beyond just startup capabilities at the time. So basically being unable to absorb the capital, which I think was a big point of our friend from the World Bank. So what I want to capture is that we are in a state of fragmentation and funding being difficult. We got it, but like we would like to look at this getting to continuity. Okay.
And unlocking.
Unlocking.
Yeah, because it's sort of linking, but also building the channels so that funding can flow. It's not like it's not there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So unlocking and linking. Those good words. This is a smaller one, and maybe we find these are all a bit random, but I call them intra-ecosystem relationships and communication. So there were a number of different discussions around language, applications being culturally appropriate or not. I don't know, think about it. Inclusive solution building. So these were mostly about inclusivity, co-creation. There's some interesting thoughts that I've put in this group as well around the fact that, which our friends from Abelobi rose, but someone else did as well. In a lot of the contexts in developing countries, it's not enough to just build a model that makes money, but there are other holistic aspects of the solutions that you need to include. But that makes it complex for investors because they don't want to hear that you have 7L in revenue ideas in your solution. So how do you do that? So that's what I'm calling that. And then trusted networks, which I thought was super interesting as well from the venture capital perspective. So yeah, validation, de-risking entrepreneurship, not necessarily de-risking investment, but de-risking entrepreneurship, mentorship, best practices, trusted ecosystem infrastructure. Yeah, so those are the big categories that have come out. I have put your work into. Thoughts, comments, objections? Okay. And then what about any missing? So we have these 6 categories. Is there a 7th, 8th category?
I was thinking about platform to give for startup to be seen, but I don't think it's a need because there are a lot of these days. So it's an important aspect to have platform to outreach, to get more people to know about what you're doing. But I think there are a lot of opportunities around, so maybe it's not a big need.
Like Uplink?
Exactly.
Okay.
You feel that gap.
Okay.
Sorry, Ron. Is there a gap around the whole governance question that you asked us? Because I mean that's kind of critical, isn't it? If we can't get the governance right, and to some extent that does speak to the fragmentation problem.
I think we're looking at that more on finance.
Exactly,
so
we're
not,
looking at that.
yeah.
But whereas the whole sort of the notion of governance, which is not just about government,
right?
Although they are obviously a key stakeholder, but it's about getting the alignment of governance right in order to be able to bring the pieces together that need to be brought together that make this whole thing work. And I don't know how to.
Isn't it under the intra-ecosystem relationships? Because it's, I like what was said about like you, from the ground up, you give them the information that then they use in their, policy drafting. I mean, because it's an ecosystem, right? Like you need all different stakeholders to speak to each other and to exchange their different perspectives and information.
But it's also, so it's about relationships, it's about alignment. isn't it? It's about the sort of win-win
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So it's not only just about opening those channels so that people talk to each other more, but it's about getting to the, okay, you're going to get this value out of it, you're going to get that value out of it. Okay.
Yeah, but I think that's why when we speak about intra-ecosystem relationship, I mean, you don't have the relationship for nothing. Yeah, you want to get to the alignment, to the win-win. In this case, win-win-win-win-win-win. Because you have so many principles.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, anyways, there are probably other things that we can look at. Part of my feeling is that we don't have enough government reps or public sector reps in our group, that we would get as much value from having that conversation, which we tried, but it didn't work out. And so maybe we table that, but we have collected notes from our little governance conversation, so we will include that in the final report. So what we're going to do now, do you think we should do it here or on the...
We can do it there. So, you know, we've got to get to the three
Yes.
big
Yeah.
ones now. So
Yeah.
we can do it on the board where everybody gets 3 votes to choose your 3 top priorities out of those 6. So just take a marker.
Yeah, so just put your dot inside
Yeah.
each bubble appropriately that you'd
Only
like
3,
to discuss.
you can't choose all 6.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And then we'll tally up where the most dots sit, and the top 3 will then come down to the bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah. I know it's going to be tough, but we only have so much time, so...
God, it's like a sort of show and tell, isn't it?
Just
There's no.
Yeah, you can move the
Yeah,
post-its.
move the post-its and then try and put the dots sort of next to each other so we can count them. Let's leave a little space for the dots. I'll move this one out the way.
I'll move that one to there, actually.
No one knows. It's so bad.
Yeah.
Straight.
Yeah.
You don't look so confident. He doesn't look confident.
I go through it every day, so I'm like, which one
No,
is
you
this?
can make or break it here, Francis.
No group think.
I'm just trying to remember what.
Close your eyes
yeah,
and put
I
your
know,
dots
I
where
know.
you
Don't look
want.
at other people.
See this here?
There's a question here about whether the audience gets to
Level
vote.
for audience to vote.
Unfortunately, you have to kind of go with the circle. Oh, sorry. So no voter fraud here. We have 3 clear winners, I think, visually.
This is the most,
Yeah, looks well. No, because these are 2 dots, I think. So I think they're tied.
Sort of fragmentation.
Could have just count this post-it on each.
Uh,
So
It's better to get, because you may think that someone else's idea is better than yours. So if you might be more interested. So we do it in separate phases, usually in action planning. Okay, so we have, I think, 3 very interesting and meaty topics that we can, we have 1 hour to unpack. Easy, we'll solve them and we'll go home happy. And sourcing and capacity, I'm happy about that one. And I know that several people here, like myself, source innovators. I'm launching a Grey Blue Wall Challenge very soon. And it's very difficult, and I'm excited to dive into that. We have intra-ecosystem relationships and communication. Let's just drop all that to getting to alignment. That's what we're going to call it. Or we can call it intra-ecosystem. And then fragmentation to continuity. How do we unlock and link this financing as appropriate to each level of the innovation pipeline? So, yeah. What do we want to start with? Yeah, okay.
Which one?
Source.
Yeah, I was going to say the alignment one's almost like at the end.
Yeah. So we don't, yeah, I'll make sure, I'll be watching the clock. We have, yeah, so, la la la. And I'll just get a little buzz when we really need to move on this topic. So a lot was unpacked when we discussed the sourcing and the capacity. So these are, let's say, the kind of fundamental inputs to innovation. Do we have the necessary people and talent? And do we have the necessary ideas? And can we reach those ideas? Though some of the challenges were raised around, are we speaking the appropriate language? Are we looking in the right places? Do the people we want to reach even know about the opportunities? What else came up in our challenges that we have? Yes. Are the application processes simply just not reachable to the people that we're trying to communicate with? Is language, actual language, a barrier? If we're doing everything in an English-centric way, which is, I think, something very important to think about. Other things that we had discussed, just to kind of remind ourselves.
Well, now you're asking.
Yeah.
You've got to remember this.
Yeah, it's a pop quiz. What did we discuss?
All the solutions came out in the first session. On the contrary.
Yeah. You said talent, so were there any more, did you said anything else about that you wanted to remind us of? I think I've more or less given you a decent overview of what we discussed. So, what ideas do we have around sourcing, or what questions do we have about how might we how might we bring source more ideas in Africa around the blue economy? What's missing then? Because we've stated that I think for this category in particular, we've stated that it's a challenge, but we haven't necessarily gotten to why, what is missing there.
Maybe a bit of visibility as what is it that is blue economy? What are the type of companies we want to see emerge? I mean, what we see also is, I think it's in the video we saw of Teka, was that you need to see that someone a little bit similar to you had this idea and could run with it and build something so that you believe that you can actually do it. So I think that there's, giving that visibility, and also for people to understand, that they get inspired basically that their idea is as worthwhile to try. And linked to that is maybe like what we see is this alumni ambassador network I mean, both at the entrepreneur level or at type of organizations level. I think it's, yeah, it helps a lot basically. So if you are like an ESO, like OHA, like the success of your entrepreneurs make the success of your program, and you know, everyone gets basically the visibility of each other and radiates more what is possible, and so inspires people to know about that. And then they make the connection. Okay, if I, for instance, sometimes just entrepreneurs, if they say, I would like someone, you know, to help me with that, they just don't know who can help with that. So it's really important that it's very clearly communicated. This is what we can help you with.
Someone champion.
Yeah.
Would you also call that more targeted networking platforms? For example, ones where the alumni of your programs are able to be available to the next alumni and then network within the certain pools that they work in, and a place where you've also got access to, or where you can also source certain individuals?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that you learn a lot also from the journey of others. Like, for instance, it was really interesting this morning. I think that there was one of the entrepreneurs who was from one of the first cohort of OHA, who is now on the jury, you know, and yeah, he must relate. You know, he must have. Why did he say that? Because he must have related to his experience. He must see in this company, you know, there are this moment where you have to ask this question. The company has to focus on this so that they can get to the next level. So yeah, it's. You know, I wouldn't predefine necessarily how you need to engage these people, but yeah, I think it's very important to see what it goes.
I think what's really valuable about like, you know, accelerator and incubator programs is that, you know, you're not just kind of leaning on some sort of ecosystem to help kind of measure or help validate maybe the quality of the founders who are coming through, but you also have a dedicated staff who can really tell you how it is as an investor. And I think bridging that knowledge gap is important because you need someone who doesn't have a vested interest in a current startup to be able to say, this is what the markets look like right now. This person took a similar approach to so-and-so, but I think this person might actually be able to be the one to scale it. And that kind of just very objective way of viewing things is, I think, a link that's missing that I think wouldn't necessarily be solved by strictly connecting the investors to the companies, but for someone to create to be able to set expectations, to maybe explain why valuations are much lower and why you should feel comfortable with that, or you know, to explain why some things take traction due to certain government regulations that govern this specific part of the continent. So that, you know, for me seems to be like, you know, something that ultimately eases an investor's feelings, because at the end of the day, we're all like, I say to my friends, like, this line of work is vibes based. It's like, you know, we're all running on like some sense of like, you know, we think, I don't know, but no one knows, and I think that's what makes early stage fun, but that's what makes people maybe double down not in the right ways. So kind of weirdly enough, appealing to just the feelings around it can be the difference between, you know, a company being seen in a really positive light, or one that gets unfortunately brushed under the rug.
I think for us, you know, it's interesting how we want to talk about the different sourcing, because sourcing for us is at such a different stage than sourcing for you. We don't look at evaluations, and our question is, if the technology was built, would it matter? Is it solving a problem? And then, is this the team to solve part of it? And so finding those two things and getting those answers and then sourcing that is what's super important for us. And I say part of the team solves part of it because we fund academics. And then we ask them, do you think you want to leave the university? And some of them say no. We say, no problem. We'll fund you to this stage, we'll help you find, or we'll network you with people that'll help you find CEO, COO. And so you know, again, we're just striving so hard at solutions, and will those solutions get out of the world? Will they be big enough for somebody to want to invest in them at some stage, or will they just be able to make enough money that they can sustain themselves? But again, that's if it's built, will it matter, and can that team get it to that stage? And so that's what we're trying to source. And how do we get to those people and to those answers to those questions of what's even needed? I don't know exactly what technology is even needed for solutions in some of these areas.
So on that note, do we feel that there is a good understanding, or, well, I guess this kind of goes to access to ocean knowledge, would also be access to ocean questions. Like, what do you think that there's a sufficient opportunity for young African entrepreneurs, or those who are, or young people, or not young people, but let's say entrepreneurial people, to get access to that understanding about those questions that they maybe have the potential to solve? And if not, how would they? What could we do better?
I think it's really, like, ocean literacy in that sense, it's really, really important. But also, like, it goes down also to inspiration, as you said before, trusting that you can have an impact, because you may be aware of the problem that the ocean is facing and everything, but trusting that you can have, as if you go down to build a solution, you individually or with your small team have like a sufficient impact for it to matter. And I think for that, having other testimony, having some use cases or example that shows what exists in all the places of the world, and you have, or what exists also in past cohorts, stuff like that, to just really grasp that individual can have, like, you can try to bring the solution forward, and if it's the one that matters, will go down the chain.
I think what's difficult on that, and I risk saying something that might like not sit well, but I think what could be tough about, you know, presenting a plethora of problems for someone to choose from and say, how do I want to solve it, where you're always going to hit a wall with you know, investors or with grant makers who are providing non-dilutive funding. They're going to ask, what makes you qualified to solve this? And I think that, you know, when you can understand what's within your lane and what, you know, I guess skill sets you bring to the table, and ultimately, like, are you kind of driven by the result to make money, then you kind of are, in my opinion, kind of the best position to be able to really make it work, and in a way kind of create, I think, the impact that you want to make, assuming you can kind of like clear those bounds. And I think part of it starts with understanding what you consider to be your own lane, which, you know, obviously branch out, think out of the box.
But yeah, it's teams that investors are looking at. So on that note, I mean, what we're talking about is people, human resources, whether it's the idea, the team, or the talent that Sarah mentioned, in hiring the right people. So let's look at that. Is there the talent needed? If there is there a break between that talent and getting into innovation, blue economy innovation specifically?
Just a little bit of a case study, which I think may help.
Yes, case studies are great.
This scenario with one idea or one innovation which was looking to be taken up by a women's group. They were going for some funding startup, and what they had was another partner organization that came and joined them or helped them, and they're the ones which took on all these most of the due diligence processes. They're the ones who acted sort of like a fiscal sponsor, but also a mentor to guide them to the first stages, and catered for some of those more extensive requirements that the group otherwise would not have been able to meet, so that they were just focused on ensuring that their initiative plays out as planned, reaches the people, has the impact that's needed, and the partner organization was just ensuring that those more structural requirements were met and due diligence processes were undergone in the right way and kind of covered that risk. So
what was the incentive of that partner?
I think it was more of they did get a percentage. They did get a percentage of the amount which was given. Then also from the social impact side of things. However, they did get a certain portion of that total amount of funding.
I just want to add to this, and actually also case study that we also supported a process of due diligence so that this organization, there's potential on this organization in this startup to have impact in the future in a certain space, but they did not meet the safe due diligence procedures. So then coming in and assisting them to get their books in order because the potential is there, and just taking their hand because now you know that potentially in the future they can have an impact. So I've also, that it speaks to what he's saying, that you maybe it's not even just social, it's just that we saw an opportunity that this organization is featuring in a vertical that we would want to work with, but at this point in time it's so emerging that they're the only ones operating, the passion is there, the team is there, they're just not ticking the right box. So now you are assisting in that way to take their hand and let them tick that right box, because at the end of the day the impact will be much more greater. And really, that's what's happening. The impact is much more greater. So it's not just necessarily maybe just giving the fund to take a box from our side, but maybe we should also start changing our minds as donor funds or whatever like that. How can we assist, not just to give the funds, but actually start co-creating on the ground with these teams, with these startups, with these ESOs.
Yeah, it's like what we learned is you have to be able to work with imperfection, or you won't get like every time my manager is like, so this is the winning team. No, it's not winning winners. Because everyone is a pioneer and there is no certainty, but you have indeed a key component like your team, like what they have as a track record, no matter if it's like individually or all of that, how they thought about the problem and what they are bringing, that you're like, well, you know what, we can take this risk and we can be more innovative and we should empower them to do what they're supposed to do instead of telling them what to do. But there are not that many investors or founders, I mean, that can also do that. So yeah, that's really important to look into that. Maybe a link now with the pipeline is also that you need as funders to find your like-minded partners. It's not that you do the same thing, it's not. But you have an alignment in terms of the goal you want to achieve and the reality and all the challenges in the reality. And then you try to see, can we be complementary? Can I not come in, but can you come in? I think this is really, I mean, we've seen it honestly firsthand, like with our seed capital. At the beginning we were alone, and then we had all of these small family offices and new foundations, and they wanted to do it. And because they saw us doing it, then they went on and did it. And maybe they changed some things, and we're not always on the same deals, but they really developed, and that helps a lot.
And just also, just to further add on to that, is like if you really find that partner and you guys you gel, and that person can be that individual, or that individual partner can be your champion. And now we're working around doing a podcast so that they can elaborate how they went through this journey, so that it can become relatable, so that the African person can realize that there is someone that went through this whole process, that it's not so easy. What is the process? What does it inquire? What does it require? So I think it's very important to also hold the hand throughout the journey with the partner from early stage to a point where you can say, now it's okay and we can release you and we can do manifold 10 times more than if you were just left, you did not tick the box of due diligence, we left you and that's it. So I think it's also important to just have that patience also.
Going back to your question about which I can't remember how you said it, but about the sort of, are we doing enough around defining the problem or something like that? And I just wonder whether we are. I like the way that Tekka approached it with not talking about the problem, but looking at the atlas of opportunity and sort of presenting it as an opportunity to people. and sort of so bringing the scientists and everyone else together, I don't, you know, as challenging as that is, to define what those opportunities are that need solutions for. I think there is more work that we need to do there, and then people can, you know, they can align with where they're, what lane they're in, and you know what kind of they bring to the table. But I don't think we're doing enough around sort of defining what that opportunity is, and it's all about, you know, climate change, biodiversity loss, building resilience, growth, all those things. And maybe not enough context specific, and I don't know how context specific it needs to be. You know, how deep do we need to go at the local level in order to be able to sort of say to people, look, here are the problems that need to be solved. Here's the opportunity for you as entrepreneurs. You know, where do you want to play, and then we help you.
So I have a follow-on question. Who do we need to present that opportunity to? And I mean, if you look at, as our World Bank friend said, if you go to the US or Silicon Valley or whatever, you can find, or as you said, there's 60 deals a week, and there's all this, that you have this ultra concentration of Stanford and Caltech and all of these other startups and incubators and whatnot. So we don't have that, I assume, in Africa or most of the other parts of the world. So who is it that we would present?
Sorry, I'm not sure if we are allowed to talk.
Yes, please,
okay.
Go ahead.
So me and my colleague actually were talking about this earlier. So I'm wondering if we're also utilizing already existing resources. For instance, there's the Western Cape Investment Promotion Agency, where they have an extensive pipeline of projects and investors. And there's also the special economic zones that exist here in South Africa as well. Are those also places that we're looking for potential projects? Because I do feel like there is a lot of opportunities there that are probably being missed just because they're not looking in the right places.
I think that falls more in the fragmentation side of things, where it's misalignment. People don't really know where to go to get access to such initiatives.
But maybe
well, that's for funding. So this would fall into sourcing. So if our funders here are looking for projects, I mean, I hear this all the time. We can't find bankable projects, and so I think what we're trying to look at in this next 10 minutes is why? Why are there not enough bankable? That's the question. Why are there not enough bankable projects?
Can I throw an idea on the table? Because
yes.
we've been speaking about holding hands of academics and entrepreneurs and how to make the project less risky. But won't it be space for a very specific professional figure that the founders gives to the startup to make things happen? Because it's great, it's always great to have a mentor. It's always great to have a business accelerator program. But this, as a founder, I found myself between people that had very great advisors, but nobody to work with me. So at some point you feel very overwhelmed. And I think it will really help to say, listen, we are going to fund your project, but before we give you the funds, we're going to provide for you that person that is a bit of a jack of all trades, because I've been working with startups before, that is going to do things with you. And if, so fills the gap that you don't have, or help you finding people with the skill you need. So that helps building the team before the startup becomes fundable. So a more hand-on approach. I need somebody that goes out there and assists finding the right manufacturer, or set up a Facebook page. Those trivial things, but it's time taken and pressure taken away from the founder that I think could be a different way to look at the problem.
It's like a studio model.
Yeah, studio.
Yeah.
How great that is.
But I guess there's also the aspect of having different players at different stages. Because you're talking about capacity, and capacity is different when you're starting a startup versus when you're further down the line. And I'll give an example, since you like examples. Breakout. We got one of our founders from their hackathon. So they organized a hackathon around the Blue Economy Initiative. Not a lot of people knew what Blue Economy is, even when they were launching Zika. First question is like, why Blue Economy? What is Blue Economy? And we realized Breakout was actually holding a hackathon around the same time that we were launching, and we went in and sought talent that way. The beauty about that is that Romano was able to tell me this is who and who and who. This was the experience we had with them. It was a weekend event. On Friday, this is what they did. But there was this one founder who her team deserted her, but she stuck on to what she wanted to do. And because of that recommendation, just seeing how she worked, that de-risked my, or rather, Juliet's investment. Going to that founder because I knew she has a work ethic, and then it also was backed up by her CV and all that she's done. Yeah, but that idea of providing capacity at different levels to sort of give these founders a platform where they can be seen by others who will provide further capacity is, I guess, part of the sourcing funding.
So holding the hand.
As you call it.
But I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing capacity building, so you enhance capacity for the entrepreneur slash founder. But on this end, I'm hearing that you would like it outsourced. You want the dirty work to be done by someone else. What direction?
Some of the dirty work to be shared, so that you can get real, practical talent at the beginning of a startup stage. Because a lot of things I don't believe people know when they start a business. So it's not just building the capacity, but it's also learning where you have to improve. But there are a lot of work to juggle.
Pipeline curator.
Something like that.
Because this person then will connect the dots for you.
Yes.
Something that you might, because you're a startup, you don't know. You don't know the language, you don't know which door to knock on. And basically, that will come part of your package. Me granting you fund and providing some type of pipeline curator that will assist you to knock, maybe not the website design.
No.
But I'm just saying, but maybe the investor. Maybe which investor speaks to blue economy, which investor speaks to this, which platform, which event, where will you be able to pitch? Make it a bit easier for you, not just to drop you.
Because also what that will do is going to speed up the process. It's already a lengthy process because you have to learn as you go. But if you have somebody that works with you, doesn't just give you, no, that is the general speed up the process.
But that's a bit like what pre-incubation is supposed to do. I think the problem with entrepreneur support organizations, the incubators, accelerator, or whatever, is that there are many, but there are very few that are very focused, you know, like for me, the first CSO that comes to me, like the first question I ask is, okay, what type of companies are you targeting, like which type of business, and what is the point A you have them in, and the point B you leave them. And very few can answer that question, which is a real issue. And to your point that you were mentioning is, in every ecosystem you have so many different actors. I'm sorry we're getting to the fragmentation, but that's the big issue is that, I mean, I did so many ecosystem assessments, and my first sentence was the rest, this ecosystem is fragmented. They're all fragmented because people don't speak the same language. Hence the need for the segmentation of companies. Speak about the same thing. So I don't know, I guess that, yeah, for like this, you know, being very clear and communicating about what it is that we focus on and who intervenes where. Because with the finance problem, it's going to be the same. Like, you know, when we work with investors, like most of our VCs, when we started investing 8 years ago, we were asking them, okay, do you source from accelerators? Because that's why accelerators were created, to create the pipeline for the VCs. And all of them were saying, no, we don't get what we want. This is not an investable business for us. So there is this link that needs to happen, and I think that we see it happening, especially in markets like Nigeria or Kenya. We see it also with more like Pan-African investors, like, you know, Launch Africa would tell you that they source from these 3 top accelerators because they get the company to a certain level where they can go and their due diligence is not so easy when it's so early stage. Having said that, their model is proven? No. So I think it's also like finding the people who are ready to take the, you know, a little bit of more risk and a little bit more innovation to validate kind of
and
process.
specificity. What I enjoy about Ocean Hub, it was specific to
Yeah.
the ocean impact.
Exactly.
I've been to another accelerator before, it was about green technology. Too broad.
Yeah.
Interesting, but too broad. So, yeah.
Specialization.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Very important.
It makes a big difference.
Because then you attract the right stakeholders, sorry, when you attract the right partners, you attract the right candidates, you attract the right startups, and it makes it easier to pick from.
Exactly, and if you are very specific to offer, then you're going to communicate to the world, which means that you won't have to go through thousands of applications that are not relevant. You will have maybe less that come, but then these people would be exactly the ones that you are looking for.
Yeah, and also in our hands, we could not think about helping green technology accelerator program. We want to provide our expertise up front, but it's more easier for us to think about Ocean Hub Africa because we know it's an Ocean Accelerator program. Green, like we won't think about providing our helps to green technology one. So specification in that sense is also easier. The expertise needed in terms of science, I think, because we would reach out to Tika on that matter.
So it sounds like ESOs and their quality, their specificity, and the ecosystem that they're generating or seeding is extremely important, and a lot of that maybe is not being done terribly well in some cases.
Yeah, but it's also the fault of the funders. The funders of the ESOs that don't have the right KPIs. Like the metrics, they just ask for X number of entrepreneurs accelerated per year. This is a really wrong incentive. Or then you have some that are like sector specific, and then the sector will be like green tech. And then you just like bring the ESO not to focus on what they know, what they want to do, what they want to. You would distract them to 1 year to 10 companies in this, 1 year to 10 companies in that. So it's a real problem. But when you look, for instance, for us, when we looked at OHA, although I'll be completely honest, I asked myself, what is blue economy? They had a track record that we very, very rarely see, because they were taking very early stage companies, but their facilitation of access to finance, and I'm saying not a prize competition, a grant from don't get me wrong, the prizes and awards are great and needed. But we were speaking about proper access to finance, like getting a proper investor that will stay with you. We have never seen, honestly, a track record like that, and they did it in very limited time. So that's why we want to help them, really validate their model completely, because we believe that if we can show the world what OHA can do, other ESOs will be inspired. Not that they will do exactly the same, but they will think of, okay, OHA succeeded because one, they were very clear about the type of companies they were helping, the stage they were taking them and bringing them, who they wanted to bring them in front of as type of investors that are relevant and all that. So that's very important.
So I have two things. One, we're not going to get to all three, but I kind of suspected that. The second one is, on that note, we've talked a lot about ESOs. I think that's really important. That's what I work on at Thousand Ocean Startups. We are all ESOs, and I think those are valuable lessons. But one last thing on this, because we're talking about sourcing and capacity, and we've kind of shifted a little bit to ESOs and their role on that kind of output, putting out investable startups. What is their role in getting more startups, right? Because there can be incubators or earlier or kind of idea generating ESOs as well that are maybe doing hackathons or pitch competitions. Actually, I think there's a pitch competition happening this week. Do ESOs have a critical role there as well, or they're more after that, in your opinion? Or your opinion, Olivier.
Okay, my personal opinion, since my middle name is incubation, listen, I did it in Europe and it was horrible. And then I went to other markets where people were actually thinking differently. So I think, I also like the fact that now we speak about ESOs, because an incubator for someone is not the same as for somebody else. So I think ESOs is a much better big name, and then whoever wants to do, they can do what they want. But then what is very clear is that, yes, the role of the ESO is just, if you are aware of the type of companies you want to support, and the stage when you take them and you bring them, then you are very aware of the type of finance that they need. And so you are aware of the type of finances that exist or do not exist and then how to get there. So.
But let's look at the other end. Where are the ideas coming from? This, I think, is a fundamental issue. Because, for example, if we look at the ocean innovation ecosystem, we are passing around the same startups.
Yeah, that's what we argue about all the time. Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
it's not just an Africa problem, it's also a global problem in ocean. How do we generate more?
Well,
So what role do these organizations
we support
have?
sorry.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I just finished and then sorry I stopped, but because it's important. We support a model that is called energy generation. They are based out of Togo, but they're Pan-African. And the way they do is that they select individuals, and they have all different backgrounds coming from all over Africa, and then they bring them together. And the first thing is, can they find together an idea that they want to work on together? But they stay with these people for 2 years.
Wow.
Yes, and they have a whole curriculum that is really university curriculum, which means that because some of them won't go on with their business, they will have an MBA certification at the end. So they are also incredible. So what I mean, that's why I mean.
What is this example?
It's called energy generation. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm not saying it's all validated, but I'm saying that they are thinking about the issues and trying to find models.
Francis, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to contextualize, the conversation. So, in Africa, again, which is probably the point of reference that you're using, blue economy doesn't exist in schools, in curriculum. There's nothing. So, how do you expect to bring someone up to speed within 6 months, 8 months, 12 months? It doesn't exist. Maybe other countries, but I'm sure in East Africa, it's only agriculture that is taught in schools. I first heard about blue economy in Stellenbosch, maybe 5-10 years ago. So it doesn't exist. So I think the baseline is blue economy is so much underserved in terms of skills, in terms of even investment at early age. I don't think, if you go to DRC today or Congo and tell them to name 5 species of fish from the ocean, they won't name them 100% because they have never seen the ocean, So the context is deeper than that. So I think some of the solutions that are being suggested are quite okay, but they are more short-term. The long-term solution is, of course, and we don't have policy makers here, but at the end of the day, agriculture is taught maybe 3 times a week in Kenyan schools, or 4 times, but there is no blue economy, there is nothing, yet 70% of the world is covered by water. So it doesn't make sense that you are taught so much about the 30%, but the 70% is left out. And so that's the context that you're dealing with. So it makes it even now, 10 times harder when you're trying to source talent, because it has to be someone who probably has lived outside Africa, who you are trying to bring out to Africa. And in a business setup, the unit economics of a Kenyan business, an African business, can't allow you to pay a European salary. So again, there you're caught. As an entrepreneur, I cannot be able to pay a project manager $3,000 in Kenya. The unit economics can't allow me to do that. Anything above $1,000, my business cannot sustain that. So those are some of the challenges that you're facing in terms of talent. And it's very easy to maybe have those short-term solutions and say, okay, we need an incubator. But even those incubators will struggle to find the right people if this blue economy or even ocean in general has been excluded from these people's life. We are hearing it that we have, and I'm pretty sure that's majority of African countries. So there is a much bigger sort of challenge when it comes to that. And of course, that restricts the talent, restricts everything that comes with a subsector like I mentioned. And it's so hard to get the talent that you need, but you know, you keep piecing them together. It's getting easier now with TECA and this kind of accelerators, Catapult Ocean, and of course what we're doing with WA, but still something that doesn't exist really in people's mind in terms of what is actually. They don't even understand blue economy in general. They think blue economy is fishing and aquaculture only. There is tourism angle. They don't understand the depth in it or the alternatives that it can have. They just think it's about fishing or aquaculture, and etc. So the limitation of knowledge is so deep that it's very hard to source talent. It's very hard to find the right startups, the right people to start startups. Even when you're doing a hackathon, the limit in knowledge is quite clear. You know, those activation events are always they're always limited to what the people can imagine, and if they don't have that background, then it's so hard for them to imagine what they can innovate. If that makes sense, and those are some of the challenges that we have. So it's a new field. It requires a lot of attention, not just from the business people, but also the policy people. So that I think that will be my submission.
Yeah, and I think that
final, Mercator, then final two thoughts here, and we gotta move to the next.
So a lot of what you say comes to, in my opinion, on resources accessibility, because the knowledge, I mean, you have plenty of things already available to learn about ocean literacy, and bringing this knowledge there. Like, we miss a platform maybe to disseminate more, but all of this is already somewhere.
In English, most likely, though.
Yeah,
For fairness.
For fairness. But if you take, for example, IOC UNESCO Ocean Literacy Toolkits, they are in multiple languages. And this is available, and we try to also start engaging with university to train not only the students but also the teachers. And this is something that.
But sorry to cut you short, but at university it's too late. It should start earlier, in my opinion. It should start much earlier.
Yeah, of course.
Because university, not everyone makes to university. I think probably 10% of Africans make it to university, if I'm not wrong. It's getting better, but.
Is it not really that the term is new?
Yeah.
Yeah. But people have been living on the coastline for years. Maybe I don't know different fish, but I've been making a livelihood in that shoreline. Maybe it's not, maybe the word is new, maybe the terminology is new, maybe we've coined these words and these processes and these business models. But I think we can't take it away from the Africans, from us, that we can make livelihood, that we've been fishing, that we've been innovating, that we've been bringing ideas to survive around that coastline. I think we should not sell ourselves short because we coined a word. I think that maybe we must just have a different approach.
Well, and I think messaging is really important. So if I can zoom out here, and if as someone who in many senses of the word is outside looking in here, it's I hear what you say, and in terms of exposure growing up, the concepts of blue economy, like maybe it's new, maybe it's catching people too late, so maybe we have to wait till whatever's going to be after Gen Z to take care of it and feel native to that idea of the blue economy. But I guess in what we've all grown up in, when watching documentaries and getting messaging around conservation of the ocean and how we're really kind of pushed as a young age to understand, like, we need to preserve this, we can't touch this. We have to recognize that kind of messaging conflicts with, here's a market opportunity to impact the ocean. Because once you kind of associate market opportunity with, exploitation, capitalism, whatever, as many terms you want to tag to it, it pushes against a lot of people's understanding of how we should be interacting with the ocean. So I think that's why you get a lot of people who are, a lot of the same concepts of software, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering apply to land as they do in the ocean. You can get the same people to do both, but the reason you can't get them to carry over is because, one, maybe they don't understand they can't have the market opportunity be articulated to them in a right way that makes sense for someone to understand who's coming from like a fintech startup in New York or San Francisco. But you also have to get over the hump of trying to understand how it goes against, or maybe could potentially have some sort of harmony with what we've been taught about the ocean growing up. So I think there's just that kind of butting heads that's preventing talent from moving into the blue economy. So I think market articulation is going to be the first step. Because for now, we only understand it as this is the fisheries market, this is the maritime shipping market. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm like, oh, so that's it, right?
At the end of the day, when you speak to an investor, it's all about commercialization. You may understand the coastline, you may know this is the ocean, but if you cannot speak the commercialization and scaling conversation, you're out. Yeah, you have to justify, I'm going to make you 10x return. If you cannot show that and show how you're going to commercialize it, most of the time mechanize your processes to be more efficient than the artisanal sort of fisherman that is there. At the end of the day, you're selling yourself short because, again, that's the much you know about the ecosystem. And that's the truth. So at the end of the day, I'm not selling us short. I'm trying to say, okay, here is a much bigger problem where, we need to think about how can we not just, tell them how to make their day-to-day living, but how can they become richer by using the ocean? Because that is more appealing conversation to them than telling them, okay, you can have your daily bread by just doing what you've been doing. But
so I guess just to add to that point, I think the difference is that the exploration of the ocean or the blue spaces has always been there, and the new conversation is about optimizing that opportunity, but also conserving the same spaces. I think that is what is new to the conversation. And you talked about talent not being there, or people not knowing about the space. Well, I think that also validates models like Teka, right? Because you're mixing people who have been in the space. Like if you look at Rosesha, the one gentleman has worked in Kemfrey for years. He's a scientist, he's worked with the government, and the other one is a commercial, has worked in the construction industry. The one in construction may never have thought of an opportunity in the blue economy space, but tag the two together, and then you bring in expertise from other areas to build solutions in that space. And in the sense of what works there, like a 2-year program versus a 6-month program, I think you can't put all your eggs in one basket. And that's the whole sense about innovation. You try, iterate, see what works. And just, because at the end of the day, the 2-year program may lead to 2 programs or 2 companies, and the 6-month program may lead to the same number. So it's about learning and innovating and plowing in as you learn and as you go. And that's the whole sense when it comes to innovation. Yes.
I'm going to cut us off now. I promise this will go to the next thing. I'll take 2 seconds just to say that talent is talent, and that's what we're looking for. And I believe in part of talent and part of life is attrition too. If 5 of them get this next 2-year, and then the next few get, and I know that this all requires funding and different funders, and funders like myself come in that you really want to invest in, and that's okay. So my question is, once we get to the pipeline step, how do we start at those beginning start points to find that talent? Because then through that attrition and good ideas, how do we get those things going so that then we can figure out the pipeline of funding to get it to that point? Because then I think we would all be much happier.
So, on that note of baskets, how do we distribute our eggs across the baskets? And that's the next topic. We're not going to have any breaks, sorry, we're just going to charge right through. We've captured, both Craig and I, the different things that we've discussed. We'll rearrange it into a kind of cohesive narrative. Not this week though, and definitely distribute with everyone around sourcing and capacity. I think that discussion very much touched on elements of our next 20-25 minutes around fragmentation, moving from fragmentation to continuity. Maybe we can just spend literally 3 or so minutes. What do we mean by fragmentation?
Different types of funds for different stages of the business development.
Okay.
So you have, you already have the seed funds, and then you have maybe investment funds, not in exchange of equity yet. And then as the business grows, then in exchange of equity, bigger funds. So fragmenting as depending on the needs of the business, you have a continuity in the kind of funds that startup can access to.
So it's like presenting it as a life cycle, isn't it? So
Yes.
thinking about, okay, what do you need in order to ideate? What do you need in order to get that ideation into a point where it's become something? What do you need in order to then turn that into a business? What do you need? And it's about the finance, not just directly to that process, but it's almost like the undercurrent that's required as well, because certainly at later stages, so you need sort of blended finance. Yes. Because you sort of recognise that there's different types of mechanisms that need to come together at the same time in order to be able to do that. But also there are de-risking mechanisms that are required at various stages in order to underwrite the risk that whether it's a financial institution or an investor or anyone else is going to need to take in order to be able to unlock that finance. So we're talking, and it's not just about insurance, but insurance does play a role, but it's also about other de-risking mechanisms as well.
How does that work in practice, though? Because we have some blended finance platforms, but in our network, and I know of others, but they tend to be one funder or one consistent kind of organization that is doing the different blended financing. But I think what I'm hearing, what we're discussing, we all come from different organizations who may or may not partner with each other. So what partnerships are required and how do we structure them to go from a state of fragmentation to continuity, where it's not just one funder has, a good example is Builder's Vision, same funder, primarily a principal. He has a number, Lucas Walton has invested in a number of different platforms, several of which are members of the Thousand Ocean Startups, and they're a very successful model of giving philanthropic capital, early stage capital, late stage capital. But it's very easy for them because they have the same board. So, they have the same mandate. But are there examples of these partnerships forming to bring that continuity? And if not, what would that look like?
So there's a funders group that's happened. There's a couple different ones. There's been meetings now. It started at Ocean's 5, Ocean Kind. They started doing a series of webinars. It was mainly funders that were invited, and some companies, and they would take on key topics. And not only would they educate all the funders in the rooms on the topics, let's say wind energy. Right? They bring in experts to talk about the energy, the landscape of it. Then they bring a couple companies in that were working on this. And then they would have these discussions in breakout rooms with the different funders. And some of us, we don't do wind energy, but it was really great to listen to it, understand that landscape. And then for all of us to understand where we reside in that space of interest and commitment. And so that's one example. Another one was more of a closed room, just philanthropic funders for ocean tech, very niche, very specific. What are your problems? What are your pipelines? And one of the things that we started doing is sharing our pipeline for proposals that we would get. So we do a lot of due diligence on proposals for early stage. And we can't fund all of them either because we don't have enough money or they just don't fit into our bucket. We don't fund aquaculture. But really great talent, really great teams. And so we're starting to massage that interface so that vetted funders can come on and take a look. And so we're having that discussion of how can we do that better. That's kind of what I'm asking here too today, is what groups are looking at these deal flows and how can we share that in a holistic sense too. So those are just some of the examples I know that we've been working on with our groups.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, it's an interesting question. So Catalyst Fund has got what they call a circle of investors. It's not about oceans, it's about climate resilience. I mean, you're probably aware of it, but that's grown quite big, and it has become a platform where people are sharing pipeline. They're starting to sort of understand each other's theses and share ideas on how they align and that kind of stuff, and I think that's quite useful. I mean, as FSD Africa, I suppose we've kind of solved for it in some ways by having a number of these things under our umbrella, so we do provide those different forms of finance. But working with obviously financial institutions and other funders and various partners as well, not just trying to do it on our own, because you can't.
I'm curious from our startup friends, how would it work best for you to have that kind of funding arrangement of that, like patient capital, equity, debt, the different across your stage of development? How would it, because often of course we want to cater to the funders, they have the money, but like from the startup side, you know, how would that actually be most useful or accessible to you? If you want to think about it.
Maybe I can try to answer that. Of course, from experience of running a startup, you need both commercial and impact sort of funding. Commercial, of course, you need the discipline of running the business in a sustainable way. Impact, because of course, for us, for example, the infrastructure was non-existent. We have invested over $2 million in Keep It Good in terms of just putting the infrastructure in Kenya, fisheries and aquaculture ecosystem. So we're basically doing government work, for lack of a better word, but it's the sort of challenge that exists in this part of the world, and maybe in other areas the infrastructure may be a bit better. But yeah, so a bit of both, because again, the business has to run in a sustainable way. You must put in certain things, governance, and things that will make the business run sustainably and all the risk aspect of everything. So yeah, for me I would say 50-50. Of course, with a bit more context on the challenges that exist for that particular subsector of the blue economy. Yeah.
From a supply side point of view, I mean, would it, in terms of an idea, I mean, could it work that we bring together a handful of people that are involved in doing different bits in the ocean space? So you've got the sort of, a couple of the incubators that are specifically working on these issues, a couple of the financial institutions that are doing the same. There's quite a few coalitions and forums around. I can think of the Nairobi Declaration on Sustainable Insurance, for example, which has now got over 80 insurance companies that have signed up to provide sustainable insurance and invest in that. You know, could that alliance be brought to the table? One of these funding forums that has a focus on oceans. I just wonder whether we could say, right, we're all interested in this space, we're all playing at different stages of this life cycle. Could we conceive of trying to do something together?
I think, well, to get really into the weeds here, but one of the biggest problems that I see working with VCs is they all have their own sourcing strategy. They all have their own sourcing strategy. They all have their own impact teams. They all have their own, and some of them, they consider their sourcing strategy or their pipeline to be IP. Some of them, and so the problem that you have then is like incentivizing them to share. What are I guess what I'd like to come away with is how can we incentivize better that sharing?
So could we work with people that are more open to share to start with? Of course. You know, and then they lead the way, and then the others that do worry more about the IP and the proprietary stuff for very good reason in many cases, then they can sort of follow.
Also, this could result in a sort of standardized due diligence process, so that the startup do it once properly, and then they speak with each other, you get the first round of funding, and then you have this coalition that say, okay, that is out of my scope. But there is another funding agency that are part of the coalition that fits perfectly with your business. And okay, you have this access organized.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another challenge, exactly when you have an entire dedicated sourcing team and, what do they call them, scouts, startup scouts, and everybody has their own. And the applications are all completely different, and they all do a completely different set of. It would be amazing to have like a common app, which is it's an American feature for American universities.
If we.
Yeah, but I think that would be something really
They ask for the same
information.
But they want it to be done differently.
Yeah.
Which is very time consuming.
But what is the incentive? Perhaps you might have a perspective, Julia, or what would be the incentive from the? I mean, I get from the startup side.
No, but from their side, it will be make sure that the startup the fund will become a success. Will have better chances of becoming a success story. Because especially at the seed funds, I'm sure an organization doesn't want to dish out startup going nowhere because they cannot access to the next level. And on the other side, somebody that has bigger funds, they want to make sure the bigger fund goes to a startup that is being de-risked before because they made good use of the seed funds. So I think there is big advantage on both sides.
No, it's just on that, but I mean, it's not really necessarily on the funding aspect, but it's about the idea of having a certificate at the end of one level to pass on to the, and that can be a scientific stamp or like also just the accelerator stamp that will allow the team to go to the next level with an approval that will, and this kind of stamp or certificate will just be a good proof, because what we faced with the TCAP program was just like after the hackathon we proposed them some of the good team that we had, and that was kind of a stamp of like these were some of our best team or the best people that were in the hackathon, and that was a good guarantee for you, and that allowed trust, and now it's nice to see that some of these teams move forward. So this idea of having this proof of like this is stamp approved, you can trust this, and
it's like the Solar Impulse Foundation with the 1,000 startups.
Yeah, 1,000 solar efficient.
Yes, they have these stamps. The World Economic Forum is putting these stamps, but yet again, we have to fill up different forms.
Yeah, I think it's who. I think the other challenge is who is the mediator of that, because each some of them are genuinely competitors. Some of the funds are competing for the same deals, especially those that are have an invested interest, and that can also be an issue. So I think that it's important to have a third-party mediator or someone who can actually that all of the parties are going to trust. I think that's also tricky. Please.
Yeah. So. A couple things. I think when it goes to different stage of investors, or even just at the same stage, at the end of the day, when you're doing early stage startups, it's there's so much that you're banking on that you don't think, kind of in defense of the investors who are kind of pushing different buttons on you, is that we all even can't really trust each other. I mean, there are famous examples of Silicon Valley of groupthink and how that led to shams getting funded and getting billion-dollar valuations. And so I think all of us, even as investors, are trying to push buttons in our own ways to try to understand if we can poke holes in ways that other investors haven't. And then on the other side of it, when it comes to like why do we ask for different things, I think investors are also competing with each other to provide very unique support to that startup. So if I'm thinking on behalf of Toyota, I know that, as a Japanese company, we know that we're going to be able to offer that kind of support. So that's why we can't really get on the same page as an investor who's maybe strategic in a very different sense. So, strategic in the sense of what markets they're going to access, but we can support on the tech. So I think that's why it's frustrating, but, I guess if, naturally once you kind of build a really strong connection with an early stage investor, they'd be able to help kind of weed it down so it doesn't feel like you're getting shuffled left to right, but eventually the bigger you grow, the more you do have to diversify the kind of support you look for in investors that go beyond their ability to write a multi-million-dollar check.
So what we looked at doing, and we discussed funding part of this and maybe doing it with some groups, is right now we're doing this organically, trying to share a pipeline of things that we can fund. But we discussed this idea of making a site that started with this more of a early stage. I mean, right now it's philanthropic, right? And so people can opt in, and there could be a couple different areas, like what is this aquaculture? So some set of parameters that, at least when we're ingesting, we do a really simple early stage application. But as more information comes in, so what's the basic things that everybody just kind of wants to know in these earlier stages. And they can jump in and say, oh, what stage is this company at? What area are they in? And just a really quick basic abstract. Once it matures beyond that, we've asked ourselves, okay, like how much later stage investors? So Investable Oceans is a great example of a website where you go in and you're an embedded investor, and they also do seminars, webinars, a couple companies who they could pitch to a whole group, and then that group actually a lot of times gives those companies and groups information, but they have a really nice dashboard that you land in on, and they have, and you know, to your point, even for us, when I go deeper just for a grant, my due diligence with those groups, companies, educators, whatever they are, it's going to be different than what some of my other grant-making colleagues are doing. So I think that having, unfortunately, it won't be the deep dive you want, but now we'll just get messy and cumbersome for everybody. But I think there is the potential to make this pipeline in the earlier stages, at least, where people can jump in and see what's there. And then the question is, you know, how do we build it out? Who funds it? So who has, or some collaborative funding? Because that could be a good role of philanthropy. And this is another important thing. I'm coming to the table, but not everybody is. And so type of funding really play a great role in this. Where is your funding? Which is the hope that we would find something amazing that you would want to invest in. A toy to say, you know, great, let's do this, let's change this part of the world. And so can we assist with multiple stakeholders to build part of that pipeline? And then the question is, at what point does that pipeline interface end? It's going to be somewhere close to the investment, because at that point it's just, it could mature up through to very, very neat. And how do you get lots of people on board?
It's very difficult to attract investment with this kind of areas that we're talking about, and I mean it in this way. Our experience has been, being a capex-heavy business, it's been quite challenging competing for the same pool of funds that the fintech guys are putting their hands in. Other guys that their month-on-month growth is probably over 50%. And we know for sure this kind of businesses, you can't really scale them up with that kind of rate, because the infrastructure investment that is required is quite heavy. So there is always that issue of blue economy, agtech, and all these other verticals, and you know, compared to, let's say, this other asset-light sort of business model, you know, we are always facing that competition, basically.
Yeah.
And it's a big challenge. Why probably the fintech guys always close the deals much more faster, especially from Silicon Valley, etc.
No, but you see this is not Ocean unique, unfortunately.
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
this with all of our verticals at Uplink. They always all struggle. But actually, I'm excited because the next wave of TECA will not focus exclusive. Not actually, we had some hardware come out of this this TECA one as well, which was fantastic. But the next TECA, I guess, will have some ability for hardware as well, because it's badly needed, and those tend to also produce a lot of jobs, which is super important for coastal regions in Africa to produce infrastructure-related and hardware-related projects in native manufacturing. We are out of time.
Question.
Please.
Pitching a question here. Would that make sense to kind of train the investors on ocean literacy, potentially? Because
yeah, so one of the projects that we do with the Prince of Monaco's Foundation is our Ocean Innovators platform. And through the Prince's Network, through the Forums Network, through a few other networks, we invite investors and we host panels that are really oriented to educating those investors. They tend to be family offices, or some of them are also bankers and, you know, typical Monaco crowd. But we also convene them at other events. So we've convened them at COP and elsewhere. And it's to educate them on what are the issues. I did a panel last year on blue food. We went through seaweed and how it actually applies to from blue food, but actually to improving agricultural yields. So that connection. We looked at fisheries. We looked at aquaculture. And I hope that investors walked away thinking that there was a lot of opportunity in blue food. So I think that it's super important, and there's a number of people who are working on in raising investor awareness on this front. So we're going to conclude. We're not late because we started 15 minutes late, so I reclaim my time. And thank you so much for contributing and for collaborating and having this very open discussion. We're not done here. There's so much we didn't unpack, and so I don't know if there's an official Ocean Innovation Africa process for these workshops, but I will condense some of this with Craig into some notes for Thursday. We'll give I think a read, or it's tomorrow afternoon or Thursday. We'll give a readout of what we discussed and some key points. We'll talk about the 5 themes and that sort of thing. But then I'll also work with Craig to put together a kind of synopsis. There was a very nice output report that they did last year, so we'll try to make it nice with your continued input. So stay tuned for some emails from me, asking for you to take a look at the draft and make additional comments, and so we can feel like we have a completed piece of work. Knowledge product, as we say before. So thank you, everybody. Let's give ourselves a round of applause.
So you're going to send it up to everyone who's here?
Yes.
You're going to register it.
Sorry?
Are you going to send the report to all of us here?
Yes, so the organizers, I assume, will make it available to everybody. So I assume they'll email you, but if you want it, ask Ocean Innovation So what I said is, what I just have not had the time to do. Ted now has the ability that you can so that's kind of quite simple. I'm going to eventually see it. I just haven't had the time.